I remember the day they kicked me out like it was yesterday. I walked through that door for the last time, holding nothing but the clothes on my back and the few coins I had in my pocket. "I don't want to see you again," they said, and their words hit harder than any punch ever could. I should have seen it coming. Every small glance, every whisper behind my back, it was all pointing to this moment. But still, I believed in them. I trusted them. I thought family meant loyalty. That morning, the sun didn't shine. It felt like the world had stopped moving. And yet, life didn't wait for me to catch up. I wandered through the streets like a ghost. Every step echoed the betrayal I didn't yet understand. I had nowhere to go, and everything I had worked for seemed to vanish in an instant. As I sat on that cold bench, shivering, I kept thinking, how could they do this? How could the people I loved most just erase me like I never existed? The city around me was alive, bustling with people chasing their dreams, while I was left behind, watching my life crumble in silence. That night, I slept under a bridge. I tried to convince myself it was temporary, that tomorrow would be better. But deep down, I knew things had changed forever. The first week was a blur. I ate scraps, begged for odd jobs, and slept anywhere I could. The humiliation cut deeper than hunger ever could. But even in the darkness, I held on to a tiny spark of hope. It wasn't much, just a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was a reason this was happening. A reason I couldn't yet see. Days passed, weeks passed, and I started moving through life like a shadow. People passed me without a glance. The city didn't care that my world had ended. I kept thinking about their faces, the smug satisfaction in their eyes as they told me to leave. "I hope you learn what it means to fail," they had said. At the time, it felt like the cruelest joke, but looking back now, I realize it was the opening act of my story. Then, one evening, as I wandered through the dusty attic of our old house, the one I had been barred from, I found something. I wasn't supposed to be there. Every step was a risk. Every creak of the floorboard felt like it could expose me. And then I saw it. A small envelope, yellowed with age, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the attic. I froze. Something about it felt different. I picked it up. My hands trembled. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they could hear it downstairs. The envelope was addressed to me. My name, written in the familiar handwriting of my grandfather, the one person in the family who had truly cared. I hesitated. Could it really be for me? After everything? I tore it open, and inside was a letter that would change everything. It started with the words, "My dearest, if you are reading this, know that I trusted the wrong people with my fortune. But you are the one I believe in." I couldn't breathe. My eyes went blurry. I read those words over and over, trying to make sense of it. Then came the details. The accounts, the properties, the businesses. All of it meant for me. Everything. Suddenly, the humiliation, the rejection, the nights spent starving on the streets, it all shifted into a strange, bitter clarity. They had kicked me out thinking I had nothing. They had laughed at me, thinking they had won. But I held in my hands the proof that they were wrong. I remember standing there, letter in hand, realizing something that made my stomach twist and my heart race. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what I would become. And that's when I started to understand. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about showing them that the person they thought was weak was unstoppable. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, and watching them face the truth. I folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and tucked it into my coat. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive again. For the first time in months, I felt power. And for the first time, I knew that my silence would become my weapon. Holding that letter, I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I felt clarity. All the nights I cried myself to sleep, all the humiliation, every door slammed in my face, They had built my fire. I didn't need to rush. I didn't need to act recklessly. This was bigger than emotion. This was about strategy. For the first time, I started seeing the patterns, the lies, the manipulations, the way they thought they controlled everything. They didn't see me. They never did. And that was their biggest mistake. I spent the next few days quietly researching, learning, reconnecting the threads my grandfather had left behind, every document, every signature, every forgotten asset. It all became a map leading to power. I learned about the businesses, the properties, the bank accounts. I learned about deals they had made thinking I'd never come back. They were careless. They were arrogant. And they underestimated me. I smiled for the first time in months. Not a happy smile. A smile that tasted like anticipation, like justice waiting to be served. I began planning. Not revenge in the messy, petty way. That wasn't me. My comeback had to be clean, undeniable, and complete. I would prove that they had been wrong about everything. They thought that kicking me out with nothing meant I was powerless. They thought the humiliation had broken me. But they didn't know that I was already building my empire. Quietly, invisibly, using their own mistakes against them. The first step was understanding the people I was up against. The ones who had smiled as I left. The ones who had taken my place, thinking it was theirs. I watched them from a distance at first. The arrogance in their movements, the casual cruelty, the way they flaunted what they believed they had won. It was almost poetic. Almost, until I remembered what I had endured. Every night I went through the letter again. Every page, every word, every hidden detail my grandfather had left for me. It was more than a letter. It was a blueprint, a key to reclaiming everything they stole. And slowly, methodically, I started moving. First, the businesses. I sent anonymous letters, documents, and proof of ownership to the right places. People who could act. People who couldn't be bribed or bought. Then the properties. Every house, every piece of land, every forgotten account. I took control, quietly, strategically, without making a sound. It was intoxicating. The power that came from knowing that my revenge didn't have to be loud. My silence became my weapon. Meanwhile, they celebrated what they thought was victory. They bragged, laughed, and ignored the signs. They didn't know that I was everywhere, unseen, reclaiming what they had stolen. And then came the first real shock, the moment I saw their faces when reality hit. I attended a business meeting, officially presenting documents they didn't know existed. Their empire, suddenly, mine by law, by design, by fate. The looks on their faces were priceless. Confusion, disbelief, fear, and, finally, realization. I didn't gloat, I didn't shout. I let the law, the documents, and their own mistakes do the talking. They had assumed I was weak, that I had nothing, that the world would swallow me whole. But I had everything they never saw coming. And it wasn't just the money, or the properties, or the businesses. It was the satisfaction of proving to myself, and to them, that I was unstoppable. I remembered every sneer, every insult, every door slammed in my face, and I felt calm. Not happy, not triumphant. Calm. Because they didn't deserve my anger. My strategy was enough. My patience was enough. And when they realized that the person they tried to erase had become the one in control, that was all the revenge I needed. But I wasn't finished yet. The bigger lesson was still coming. The part where I would show them without a single harsh word that power earned quietly is far more terrifying than any shout or scream. I had become the owner of everything. But more importantly, I had become the person they could never break. And that was priceless. Even after I took control of everything, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was something heavier on my chest, something that no money, no power could erase. The betrayal still burned. The faces of the people who kicked me out haunted my thoughts. I wanted them to understand. Not through shouting, not through chaos, but through the undeniable truth staring them in the face. And so, I started the next phase, the quiet confrontation. I didn't call them, I didn't threaten them. I simply walked into the spaces they had once dominated, now owned by my name. The first time I saw them after reclaiming everything, the arrogance in their eyes faltered, just for a second, but it was enough. I let the silence speak. They looked at me, expecting desperation, weakness, maybe even tears. Instead, they saw calm, control, power. And in that moment, I realized something important. Revenge isn't about making them suffer. It's about showing them what they lost by underestimating you. I could almost hear their thoughts. How did this happen? How could they? Every step I took in those rooms, every document I placed on the table, every signature they had ignored. It screamed a story they didn't want to hear. They were furious, yes. Shocked, yes. But most of all, powerless. It was intoxicating. Not because I wanted to hurt them, but because truth has a way of cutting deeper than anger ever could. And then came the hardest part, facing my own feelings. I thought I'd feel relief, happiness, even vindication. Instead, I felt something else. I felt free. Free from the weight of their judgment. Free from the lies. Free from believing that my worth was tied to their approval. For years, I had thought that being kicked out meant I had lost everything. But in reality, it had given me everything. I remembered that cold day on the street, shivering, thinking I was nothing. I had been wrong. The letter in my hands wasn't just inheritance. It was a reminder that people who try to erase you often underestimate the fire they ignite in you. I started visiting places I had once been barred from, offices, houses, even the small cafe where I had cried after being thrown out. Every step I took was a silent statement. They had thought they could control my life, dictate my path, decide my worth, and now every place they once ruled belonged to me. But here's the strange part. Power didn't feel like revenge, not in the way I expected. It felt justice. Calm, undeniable justice. I didn't need to rub it in. I didn't need to humiliate them. The universe had already done it. I walked past their faces, quiet, composed, holding myself with a dignity they would never understand. Some tried to speak, but the words died in their mouths. They had nothing to say because I had already said everything. With my actions, my presence, my ownership of what they had thought was theirs. And as I left each room, each building, each office I had reclaimed, I realized something bigger than power or money. This story wasn't just about ownership. It was about resilience, about never giving up when the world tells you that you're nothing. It was about rising above betrayal with grace and patience. And it was about proving, first to myself and then to everyone else, that nothing, not even those who claim to love you, can define your worth if you refuse to let them. I remember standing on the balcony of our old house, looking down at the street below. The city had once swallowed me whole. Now, it was mine. Quietly, legally, undeniably mine. And I whispered to myself, a confession more than a statement. They thought I'd stay broken. They were wrong. The letter, the inheritance, the reclaimed properties, they were proof. Proof that sometimes the universe waits for the right person to rise. Proof that sometimes being cast aside isn't the end. It is the beginning of a life far greater than anyone could imagine. And in that moment, I realized something else. The greatest revenge isn't showing them you're better. The greatest revenge is living so well, so fully, so undeniably, that they can't touch your peace. I had won. Not with anger, not with chaos, not with shouting, but with patience, with strategy, and with silence. I had become the owner of everything, but more importantly, I had become the master of my own life, and that is a kind of victory that no betrayal can ever take away. Once I reclaimed everything, the days that followed felt surreal. I walked through spaces that had once humiliated me, now silent under my ownership. I could see the people who kicked me out trying to act casual, pretending nothing had changed. Some avoided my gaze altogether. Others tried to mask their fear with forced smiles. It was almost funny. Almost. But I didn't let myself gloat. Not yet. Patience was still my ally. I wanted every move I made to echo a lesson they couldn't ignore. And slowly, I started to explore the full scope of what my grandfather had left me. There were businesses they had mismanaged, properties they had neglected, accounts they had assumed were lost. Every misstep they had made in their arrogance became my opportunity. I didn't just reclaim what was mine, I improved it. I expanded it. I turned their mistakes into my foundation. And while I built my empire quietly, I watched them unravel. They had once thought me weak, powerless, forgotten. Now they realized the truth, that I was untouchable. I remember one evening, standing in the boardroom of a company they had once dominated, watching them squirm as I introduced changes they couldn't oppose. Their faces, priceless. Shock, confusion, disbelief, and, slowly, acceptance. They had no words, no strategy, no idea how to respond. It was almost poetic. And yet, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt peace. Every sleepless night, every tear, every moment I thought I had lost everything. It had led me here. And I understood a truth I hadn't realized before. The people who betray you don't define your life. Your choices do. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't need to yell, fight, or humiliate. Everything had fallen into place without me lifting a hand in anger. I became a master of timing, of strategy, of silence. And in that silence, my victory spoke louder than any words could. They had tried to erase me, tried to write me out of the story, but I had rewritten it, better, stronger, unshakable. I walked through the halls of our old family home, the same home they had kicked me out of, and for the first time, I felt like I truly belonged. It wasn't just about ownership of things. It was about owning my life, my choices, my destiny. The letter from my grandfather had been more than instructions. It had been a key, a guide, a reminder that even when people turn against you, there is a path forward. I started reconnecting with people who mattered. Mentors, friends, even strangers who had helped me in moments of despair. Their support reminded me of another truth. Family isn't always blood. Loyalty isn't always given. Sometimes you build it. Sometimes you choose it. And I chose to surround myself with people who lifted me, not those who tore me down. I looked back at the family who had cast me aside, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. They had lost something far greater than wealth. They had lost the trust, the respect, and the presence of someone who would have cared for them. And that loss was final. I realized that life had given me a lesson in disguise, a lesson about resilience, patience, and the quiet power of persistence. And as I stood on the balcony that once felt like the edge of the world, looking at the city below, I whispered to myself, I am more than what they took from me. I am everything I was meant to be. And in that moment, I knew. The past no longer held me. The betrayal no longer defined me. I was free. By now, everything had changed. The people who had laughed as I left were no longer laughing. They walked carefully, hesitantly, through spaces that once belonged to them, now ruled by my name. Every glance I caught, every whisper I overheard, reminded me that the tables had turned. But the strangest part, I didn't feel triumphant in the way they expected me to. I didn't revel in their fear. I didn't bask in their humiliation. Instead, I felt strength. Strength in knowing that I had endured, strength in knowing that nothing they did could take away my integrity, my will, or my resolve. I began meeting people, partners, lawyers, and advisors, the kind who respected what I had rebuilt, not the mistakes they had made. Every deal I signed, every property I reclaimed, every company I saved from collapse became a testament to patience and perseverance. I could see them watching from the sidelines, struggling to understand how the person they tried to erase had become unstoppable. It was more than revenge. It was proof. Proof that betrayal doesn't define your future unless you let it. One day, I returned to the family home, standing at the threshold where they had cast me out. I remembered that cold, empty morning, the fear, the hunger, the despair, and I realized those feelings no longer held power over me. I walked through the rooms, now filled with my vision, my decisions, my life, and I understood something deeper than ownership or money. Power is fleeting. Influence is temporary, but resilience lasts forever. They came to me then, hesitantly, faces full of regret, shame, and confusion. We, one of them started, but the words faltered. I didn't need to say anything. The silence did the talking. The look in their eyes, the realization that their choices had consequences, was more satisfying than anything I could have shouted. And as I stood there, letter in hand, I thought about my grandfather, who had trusted me even when others didn't. He had seen something in me they couldn't. He had left me a path forward, and I had walked it, step by step, quietly but relentlessly. I told them nothing, let them piece it together themselves. They had lost more than money. They had lost the trust, the respect, and the presence of someone who truly mattered. And in that loss, I saw my final lesson. True power isn't about taking revenge in anger. It's about proving to yourself that you can rise above it all. That morning, I walked out of the house, looking at the world differently. Every street, every building, every corner I once thought I'd never reach again, now belonged to someone who refused to be broken. I whispered to myself, I didn't lose everything that day. I was just beginning. And in that truth, I found peace. The world had shifted beneath my feet. Everything they had taken from me, every insult, every betrayal, had become the fuel for my rise. I stood in a place I had never imagined. Not just wealthy, not just powerful, but truly free. Free from fear, free from doubt, free from the belief that someone else could define my worth. I walked through the halls of the businesses I now owned, touching the walls as if to remind myself, this is real. It wasn't magic, it wasn't luck, it was resilience, patience, and the quiet determination to never give up. And yet, there was one thing I wanted to make clear, more to myself than anyone else. Revenge isn't about hurting others. Revenge is about reclaiming yourself. I remembered the cold nights, the hunger, the endless loneliness. I remembered the faces of the people who had turned their backs on me. And now I understood. Their betrayal was a gift in disguise. It had forced me to see my own strength, to discover what I was capable of. I had learned that peace feels better than payback, that calm is stronger than chaos, that dignity is more satisfying than triumph fueled by anger. I spent my days building, not destroying, expanding, not breaking, reclaiming, not retaliating. And the people who had once laughed at me, they watched, helpless as I rose above the life they tried to deny me. I saw their regret, their disbelief, their shame, and I felt nothing but clarity, because the story wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. It was about proving to myself that no one could define my worth, that even when the world casts you aside, you can stand taller than ever, that even when betrayal feels like the end, it can be the beginning of a life far greater than you imagined. I returned to the letter from my grandfather often, reading it quietly, almost reverently. He had trusted me when no one else did. He had given me the key to everything, not just material wealth, but the courage to rise above the pain. And now I understood. The greatest inheritance isn't money, or property, or businesses. The greatest inheritance is the knowledge that you can survive, that you can endure, that you can thrive even when the odds are stacked against you. I walked through the city streets, once a place of despair, now a place of victory, and I whispered to myself, softly but firmly, they thought I had nothing. They thought I was broken. They were wrong. Sometimes walking away is the loudest revenge. Sometimes silence and patience speak louder than anger ever could. And sometimes the greatest power you can have is the knowledge that you are unstoppable, unshakable, and free. I had lost nothing. I had gained everything, and for the first time, I felt whole. Because I was no longer defined by betrayal. I was defined by my rise, by my courage, by my resilience, by my truth. And that is a life worth everything.